5:30. Now, a couple of things going back to what we started with because of the news yesterday with Baylor changing the defensive coordinator with Ron Roberts. Question from, let's see, Steve Frogvan. He said, Steve Frogvan here, with utmost respect to Baylor and Aranda, would it be possible Aranda is might too esoteric, maybe a bit too in-depth, in the depth of thought to be consistent winner at Baylor? I might be out of line as a Frog fan here, but I'm just asking. I have respect for Baylor. Wish him good fortune. Is Aranda truly the right guy? Yeah, there's any question about whether he's the right guy. He was not as bad as he was when they were 2-7 or clueless or overwhelmed. He was not as much of a genius when they were 12-2, and maybe this year not as sometimes it seemed confused with his team as they were at 6-6.
No, I think he's the right guy. I think he's figuring it out, and I think that there are certain things that worked out. And look, here's the other thing. The personality of your players changes too as you recruit and all that. And if the coaching doesn't match with that, the assistant coaching's not working, then you got to make changes. And I think that's really where they are right now. So, Ron Roberts probably really worked for guys like Jalen Petrie and Terrell Bernard and those guys. And maybe for this group of leaders, it just didn't work anymore. It's just how it goes.
Well, I think it's clear based on just some interactions on Twitter and whatnot that this was a well-received move by some family members and by some players themselves. So take Dave Aranda out of the equation. That tells me something if some of the players, current and former, and parents are, like, hey, good move. That was needed. I mean, that's not Dave Aranda. That's clearly like, yeah, something was off. I mean, I understand the quick trigger that people have to like make a determination on something, but it's year 3. They've all been wildly different. I think we need much more of a sample size before we start thinking about like who he is or who he isn't. I think we need, another season and another, obviously, a round of changes to see kind of where it falls ultimately, because they have been a 2-win team, they've been a 12-win team, and they've been a 6-win team. So no one knows for sure, but my confidence isn't shaking Aranda. I think if you look at this year, they didn't lose games because of Dave Aranda. That was a well-coached team. Like, there might have been play calls that weren't great, but like ultimately they were in position to win more games than they did. I think at worst they should have been 9-3. Because there are games that I think that they just flat out lost, and then they lost the coin flip games that they won last year. So they got lucky in some cases last year, and Tech misses a field goal at the end to send it to overtime. That could have turned into a loss, and games like that. They didn't get that benefit this year. They didn't get that benefit in any way, shape, or form this year. So, just a bad string of luck. Something like if you watched Baylor, though, and you kind of knew going in what they were, it was clear as day, week after week, like just something is not right here. And now that they've made those moves, I feel like with the timing of those and the fact there hasn't been a bunch of others already made, it was just like those are the ones that we're making first and foremost. I want to see, how they respond next year to those in particular. But I'm not worried about Aranda.
I want to read this from Colt Barber. He wrote an opinion piece on yesterday's news. And this is in the premium section, but it's been out for a long, long time. Robert's street cred as a defensive mind is impeccable. Wheat was brought on to replace Powledge, who's now, of course, co-defensive coordinator at Oregon, who was also the special teams coach. Because of Aranda's trust and personal relationship with them. To an extent, we can talk about on-field performance in 2022, but a decision of this magnitude was not made because of one disappointing season, not considering what we know now not considering what we know about Aranda. Here's the part. It's appropriate to speculate on comments from the season by Aranda, and he did say this multiple times, coaches weaponizing items such as performance against players, going directly against the grain of person over player, culture strived for by Aranda since arriving in Waco. That doesn't mean he was specifically pointed at any one particular member of the staff, but he didn't just say that players were immature. He used that as well about members of the staff.
Yeah, he mentioned coaches and just something being off. And that was what was weird. You could never pinpoint because you didn't have the behind the curtain look. Like, we got a little bit of that, but not to the point that he's or anybody else is really going to reveal those things during that process, like during the middle of the season. So, then you find this announcement of these two guys being gone, and you're like, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense now. It makes a ton of sense. That was clearly part of what the issue was, but it wasn't just on the field either. It was off the field, as you mentioned, as far as relationships and things like that, but it goes into recruiting. It goes into a lot of different facets. So they were moves that were in his eyes, clearly needed to be made and needed to be made now. I trust his judgment. I, again, think they're better than their record indicated, and last year their record might have been better than that team really was, ultimately. I don't know, but they closed strong. They won a Big 12 title in Sugar Bowl, so I'm not going to debate the 12-2 all that much. But, yeah, you can question certain things. The Gary Bohannon move, was that right in the long run? We'll never know, but that will always be a debate in regards to this season. But I think we definitely need to see some more and give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm nowhere near, questioning Aranda at this stage.
Yeah, he just completed his third year. One of the things about staff changes, especially early on in a coach's tenure, if you are just looking at the last two head coaches here, Art Briles and Matt Rule, Art Briles had his kind of staff built over years of them being together.
Yep.
Right? And same with Matt Rule. They'd been to a couple stops already with that group. And you see it now in Nebraska. A lot of those guys are going with him. Dave Aranda doesn't. I mean, he has guys that he knows and he's been with, but as a head coach, who are those guys that are going to be with him that are going to work? I don't know if the days are still going to be here where, guys like, Bobby Bowden have the same offensive and defensive coordinators for all this time, but those coaches that stay with you for 5, 7, 8 years, through a couple jobs or whatever it is, he's not to that point yet, too.
He's a young coach in terms of age. He's a young coach in terms of experience. But let's listen. Here, who of these guys were fired for production and who had better opportunities to move on? Larry Fedora.
Fired.
Needed to go.
Yeah. George Munoz.
Yeah.
Needed to go. Joe Wickline.
Yep.
All on the same day, within the same day. Brian Stewart.
He took a job.
Yeah.
Maryland.
Yeah.
He took
Matthew Pallage is the co-defensive coordinator at Oregon. Go ahead.
Brian Stewart took the defensive coordinator spot
at
Maryland.
Matthew Pallage, co-defensive coordinator at Oregon, and they had a hell of a year. Joey McGuire became the head coach at Texas Tech. So there's 3 in a row on performance in the positive way. Chancey Stuckey went to Notre Dame. That's 4. Ron Robertson, Ronnie Wheat gone because so 5 of the 9 based on productivity following disappointment during the season. When we come back, Mickey Spag.